This is Trindays Roundtable 16, Sacred Rule Economics. There is another way to run this railroad, Geonomics. Let's learn it together. Featuring Paul Fitzgerald, Elizabeth Gould, and our guest presenter, Alanna Hartzok. Our host is publisher Chris Milligan. I am Bruce DeTorres, the moderator. Paul and Liz are husband and wife co-authors of Invisible History, Afghanistan's Untold Story, Crossing Zero, the AfPak War at the Turning Point of American Empire, The Valediction, 3 Nights of Desmond, and Volume 2, The Valediction, Resurrection. I'm going to read Alanna's bio, and then Paul and Liz will recap last month's roundtable for a moment, and then I'll introduce Chris Milligan. But Alanna Hartzok is an educator, activist, and lecturer in the areas of economic justice, land rights, and commons rent public finance. And she is the administrator for the Baltimore Thrive Commons Rent Policy Implementation Project. Her book, The Earth Belongs to Everyone, received the Radical Middle Book Award. She is a recipient of the International Earth Day Award, and she was a candidate for Congress for the Green Party in 2001 and the Democratic Party in 2014. Alanna initiated a tax reform bill for the state of Pennsylvania that passed nearly unanimously. You can learn more at the International Union for Land Value Taxation, and their site is theiu.org. That's theiu.org. Before Paul and Liz recap last month, my pleasure to introduce our host, Chris Milligan.
I want to thank everybody for, spending some time with us here. I think it's very, very important for us to learn a better way to walk down here than just pointing a gun at people and say, hey, do this, And that's why, this is a round table, okay? Because table is where, we meet and we talk and we discuss. And out of discussions come good things. So I'm just very, very happy to see people here and onwards to a better future.
It is great to have you all here today for our 16th, by the way. This is our 16th roundtable. But we wanted to go back and take a quick look at roundtable 15. If you remember, it was titled "The Marriage of World Peace and Economic Justice Will Create Heaven on Earth." Peace must replace war as the foundation of life, and economic justice will lead the way. But at that roundtable, we focused on the importance of the commons, the term used to describe how people shared resources from nature equally for millennia. Over the centuries, we showed how the people's access to the commons began to diminish and eventually was lost. Well, now Alanna will lay out for us a solution to that outcome. Her presentation, Sacred Rule Economics, will show the perennial wisdom teachings about land, money, and public finance. She will explain how economic justice will lead the way to world peace when land and natural resource values, the common rent, become the primary source for raising public revenue. Let the show begin, Alanna.
I want to say my PowerPoint style is to go through a lot of slides very quickly. And I'm not going to read every single word. This will be recorded. You can always go back to it to get some of the details. But I want to present like a big picture, a big gestalt for you today. Okay, I've already been introduced. I want to say that my book is a free PDF at the iu.org books website. Got to start with his great quote, Swami Beyondananda, our favorite Swami. It's time to shift from a fear-based state of emergency to a love-based state of emerge and see. So Sacred Rule Economics is the application of the Golden Rule to the production and distribution of wealth. So this idea of the Golden Rule, it dates back centuries and centuries. Rushworth Kidder identifies the concept appearing prominently in Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, and the rest of the world's major religions. So it's really universal. So you can find a lot of these really wonderful little posters online you can print out. This is the golden rule quotes from 5 major religions. So sacred rule economics and natural law. Sacred rule economics draws from natural law as the manifest expression of the divine laws of creation and life expression. What is necessary in order to secure, protect, and further unfold the creation, nature, and human beings as a part of nature. Thus understood, sacred rule economics sets forth the foundation for the, for the evolution of consciousness, okay, for spirit and nature dancing together. What do birds have to do with it? Well, think about this. That little bird with that little bird brain can make a very nice nest for its new bird family. It's amazing, a bird nest, clay in the bottom, so it has a solid bottom, and then build around that. They have free access to those bird nest building material. They have free access to a site on a tree where they can put that nest. And then they have free access to the food to feed their little baby birds. Would that we could do so well in human society. But by studying nature, that's studying natural law, we can learn about how to have a harmonized society. This is Chief Little Bear at an exposition about 120 years ago. And he's pointing out the crack in the Liberty Bell, which I like to use as a metaphor. It's an iconic symbol of independence. Cast with the lettering, proclaim liberty throughout all the land and to all the inhabitants thereof. This is a biblical reference from the book of Leviticus, and you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. The scripture is a reference to the Jubilee year of ancient Israel when all debts were to be canceled and each person had the right of return to land that had originally been allocated in a just manner. Now, along with the crack, it has this beautiful Leviticus quote, which is the promise of essentially an economic democracy and a fair economy, which we've never built to match the political economy, and thus the political economy is being destroyed, hence that crack in the Liberty Bell cracked upon its arrival in Philadelphia. And the image of native Chief Little Bear points to the crack as though he's reflecting on the major flaw in the founding of American democracy. The lack of economic human rights based on each person's birthright to the earth's land and natural resources and to a money and banking system that enables fair trade without usury. The crack in the Liberty Bell, thus understood, has brought us to the point of gross wealth and power inequality, which is fast destroying the basic freedoms and liberties of the inhabitants of the United States. So a lens that I am looking through history and current events through is this Wetiko compared to unity consciousness. So Wetiko was the word that the Lakota Indian gave to the colonizers. They didn't understand why these people were not keeping their promises, were stealing their land. They didn't understand why the men beat their wives and they beat their children, because children and women were precious and sacred, as was all life to Native people. So this separative consciousness, we really have to look at how this evolved in the European psyche and brought us to the present dilemmas. So Wetiko is self-separated, divided, hierarchical, it's predatorial, it's trauma-inducing, it's ugly, it leads to war. Then unity consciousness is connectedness, it's the unity and diversity, it's circular, holistic, it's healing, it's beauty. So there's two very contrasting image. The Wetiko consciousness moves into the direction of the deep separation of satanic and evil forces. And then of course, unity consciousness is the beautiful one world that we are dreaming about and wanting to create. One indicator of when we went from a more unity consciousness in the higher period of the Middle Ages that had a more fair sharing of land to some degree. And then this enclosure period, this picture shows country people leaving a village due to enclosures in the 18th century. So the Enclosure Acts, that's an old form of spelling for the E enclosure, cover enclosure of open fields and common land in England and Wales, creating exclusive legal property rights to the land baron, to land that was previously held in common. And over a period of about 500 years, we had 5,200 enclosure acts affecting 6.8 million acres. Natural law would have the equal right of all men and women to the use of land, as clear as the equal right to breathe the air, a right proclaimed by the fact of our very existence. For we cannot suppose that some men and women have a right to be in this world and others do not. Henry George, we'll be hearing much more about him later. The earth belongs to everyone. The claim by birthright can only be legitimate if it's acknowledged that all other human beings have an equal claim to land and resources. So the deepest ethical dimension of territorial rights recognizes that humanity is one and indivisible in its fundamental claim to the earth as the birthright of all. The basis of our present land claims are, it's a complex historical weaving of claims by discovery or purchase or constitutional law, length of residency, military might of conquest, and other ways to gain and maintain secure position. We are saying that none of those make the cut in terms of what we really need to solve the land problem. We need this fundamental right to the land. So now we'll start a little basic economics lesson. Land is all the commons. It's all the gifts of nature. It's all the resources. It's the fish in the ocean. It's everything that's nature given. Now you see that shovel there in the middle of the neighborhood. It's digging out a hole for maybe a new house. Maybe it's mining some resources there. So the shovel is capital, but everything comes from the earth. When labor, and this is an easy understood term, it's work, physical or mental work, and the capital tools of production, we're not talking money at this point at all. We're just talking basic land, labor, and capital. So capital is wealth from labor on land and resources that's created to increase the capacity to increase wealth. So labor, physical and mental, on land, gifts of nature, yields capital, which are the tools. Basic needs can be secured with minimal capital if there's secure land rights. So the classical economic terms for the distribution of wealth, who gets the wealth that's created, wages goes to work, to labor. Interest in this understanding, it goes to the ownership of capital. A laborer may produce their own capital, in which case it's a combined factor of wages and interest. But the rent is the really important thing, because right now the rent, which is the term that is the value of the land and resources, is the value, actually the monetary value, the value to human use that accrues to the land and resource base. Because of the way we treat land, not as a fair share right to the common, but as private profit and speculation and hoarding. This privatized land rent keeps increasing and increasing, so that eventually everything, the basic needs, become more expensive, and the dominators through the land and money system have control of most of the wealth and begin to be the predators of the rest of us. So this fundamental, okay, this is classical economics. What neoliberal or neoclassical economics did at the beginning of the 1900s was a lot of money went in to pay schools of economics to get rid of this classical economic understanding. The endpoint really was Henry George's work, and to invent neoliberal or neoclassical economics that made rent this important factor, and the earth itself a mere subset of capital. So we've been living all these 120 years at least under the neoliberal only two factors, which cannot get a handle on how you create a fair and free economy. So in three factors, land is the term for all gifts of nature: surface land, natural resources, water, electromagnetic spectrum, even the L5 zones in outer space where satellites can best balance between the gravitational pulls of the earth and the moon. In a fair society, access to these commons is secured with the payment of commons rent to support the well-being of all as the basis for public finance and taxation, while removing taxes from the productive labor and wages and capital, real tangible tools of production. So in a fair society, money then is a utility useful for simply the exchange of goods and services. But when the money system becomes a way to accumulate wealth for the few via various practices of usury, then wealth inequality grows to the point of social breakdown. So we're going to skip around to different time periods and different places around the planet, and we're going to follow this golden thread of perennial wisdom teachings on land. So the early Christian land ethic echoed the Old Testament teachings regarding land rights. Leviticus, the land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. You are but strangers resident with me. This is the voice of Yahweh speaking. The profit of the earth is for all. Isaiah, woe unto them that join house to house, that lay field to field, till there be no place. In other words, woe unto them that keeps enclosing others' land and grabbing the land that before was allocated to others. Nehemiah prophet says, restore, I pray you, to them even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, and their houses. So we can see by the screaming of the prophets that the land laws were not being obeyed and honored, and society was beginning to shift into gross wealth and power inequality. So this patristic period, the 300 years after Jesus and before the Roman Empire made Christianity its main religion. Christianity lost its economics teachings at that point, but you had these prophetic teachings in the early Christian period. So San Ambrose, how far, O ye rich, do you push your mad desires? Shall ye alone dwell upon the earth? Why do you cast out all the fellow sharers of nature and claim it all for yourselves? The earth was made in common for all. Why do you arrogate to yourselves exclusive right to the soil? St. George the Great rebuked the Romans when he said they wrongfully think they are innocent who claim for themselves the common gift of God. Land tenure in the promised land described in Leviticus, those with poor land were to be given more acreage. Those with more fertile land would be given less. Now they're trying to figure out how to fairly divvy up the promised land. But what about land locations regarding the marketplace? Here's where you've got to go into the Talmudic writings, the Gemara, Baba Batra, and this was brought forth in Solomon Cohen's work, The Land Question in the Talmud. Upon the more valuable holdings was to be imposed a tax or a lease fee, the measure of which was the excess of their respective values over a given standard, and the fund thus created was to be paid out in due proportion to those whose holdings were in less favorable locations. What they were figuring out, they said, those who have land closer to the market, that would have been Jerusalem, have an advantage with those who further away from the markets who might have to travel 2 days. How do you make that equitable and fair? And it was for a cash payment, those with the advantageous location to those with less advantageous. So as for land disadvantaged and situated, the adjustment was to be made by money. That is to say, those holding land near the city of Jerusalem should pay into the common treasury the estimated excess of value pertaining to it by reason of its superior situation, while those holding land of less value by reason of its distance from the city would receive from the treasury a money compensation. This is essentially land value taxation, which is going to thread all through this back to here, 5,000 years ago, economic principles in the Vedic tradition. This is brought forth by Dr. Nicholas Kazanis, Greek scholar of Vedic history, Indology, and the culture in the Indus River Valley 5,000 years ago. So the ancient Indian codes of law, the sages instituted their laws. They recognized fully the needs for bodily wholeness, food and shelter, locomotion and assembly, property, reputation, solitude and peace, physical work, and spiritual development. Some we're pretty sure that this period was a high unity consciousness, that the Vedic civilization was actually a worldwide civilization. You can see signs of it all around the world, but we'll have the focus now on this great Indus River Valley. And land value taxation, a surprising feature, is the principle of free access to land for all, and the land value tax was the source of government revenue and expenditure 5,000 years ago. It's surprising because land value taxation is thought to be a fairly modern concept. There is a concept of land rent or surplus, a higher charge placed on the more fertile land and land in the population centers. So land tenure in the Vedic age, lawgivers provided their people both with common lands and individual holdings. The land is a divine entity, belongs to the whole of mankind. The land belongs to all men equally. The whole community holds the region where it lives. And land is cultivated by individuals or families, not jointly so much by communities. These ancient teachings affirm a just land ethic that natural advantages or common property may not be diverted to private claim. Now we're skipping to classical economics, the founders, which were the physiocrats, the physicians of the King of France. The court was trying to figure out the wealth distribution throughout the French region then. So he called upon court doctors because they understood the flow of blood and fluids throughout the human bodies. They figured these smart guys could figure out the flow of wealth throughout the kingdom. So they set themselves about to the task. These are called then the physiocrats, physicians. Physiocrats then as the founders of classical economics. They coined this phrase, impôt unique, the single tax. And after analyzing the problem, they urged the French kings to levy taxes on land instead of labor. One of the Enlightenment's wise men was Mirabeau the Elder, one of these physiocrats. He held that their discovery would be, if enacted, a social advance equal to the inventions of writing and money. King Louis, was it the 14th? Well, he didn't listen to this advice. And what did you have a few years down the road? French Revolution, and the king lost his head. So why do we skip now to China? Well, we've mentioned Quesnay as one of the key physiocrats. Now, Quesnay is known for his writings on Chinese politics and society. Because of his admiration of Confucianism, Quesnay's followers bestowed on him the title of Confucius of Europe. So many tax principles put forth by him and other physiocrats were derived from land and tax policies of dynasties of China. So we mentioned Confucius, but this guy Mencius is even more important to the economic understanding. He inherited Confucius' ideology and developed it further. He said the government should have a mostly hands-off approach regarding the marketplace. He said taxes on the property were acceptable and to be the only means by which the dukes and states would collect money for society. These taxes were also progressive, meaning the families that owned larger and more fertile pieces of land would pay more than the families with the uniform smaller land allotments. Now, Thomas Paine, one of our great founding fathers, we know about Paine. We probably all know that he was not a land speculator, and he was the only well-known founding father that died in utter destitution and poverty. So he said, men did not make the earth. It's the value of the improvements only, not the earth itself, that's individual property. Every proprietor owes to the community a ground rent for the land which he holds. He said, from this ground rent, I propose to create a national fund, out of which there shall be paid to every person a sum. Now we have with us Jeffrey Smith, who's a very strong advocate of citizen dividends, of payment, of direct payments to each individual from the land rent fund. But so when Paine talks about the ground rent, this is really what we mean by the commons rent. Paine would have gotten his understanding probably from Adam Smith, but Adam Smith, as a young man, his tutor brought him to Paris and he studied the physiocratic writings. So Smith was influenced by the physiocrats, influenced by ancient Chinese, and then Thomas Paine by Smith. So he wrote in his classic Wealth of Nations that both the ground rents and the ordinary rent of land are a species of revenue which the owner in many cases enjoys without any care or attention of his own. In other words, land speculation, land hoarding, just sleep overnight and your wealth grows in value. So ground rents seem, in this respect, a more proper subject of peculiar taxation. Nothing can be more reasonable than that a fund which owes its existence to the good government of the state should be taxed peculiarly. Kind of a peculiar use of that word, but he means in particular. Economist Michael Hudson very clearly puts Karl Marx in the classical economics tradition. Now, little things about Karl Marx that most Marxists don't get. He said, as capitalist production develops, landed property acquires the capacity to capture an ever-increasing portion of this surplus value by means of its land monopoly, and thereby of raising the value of its rent and the price of the land itself. The capitalist still performs an active function in the development of the surplus value and surplus product. but the landowner need only appropriate the growing share in the surplus product and the surplus value without contributing anything to this growth. So Marx got the land problem. He talked about the land problem. He tried to get his followers to get the land problem. But I've come to the conclusion that Marx was not a Marxist. You ask any Marxist today about Marx and the land problem, they're absolutely clueless. Somebody's in the waiting room, I see. Okay, so this is remarkable. Karl Marx and Adam Smith are in agreement that rent should be socialized. So the Wetiko consciousness, divisive, predatory powers that should not be, love to keep us divided. And this has been a really, really good trick, not having us dig down into the land problem addressed by both Marx and Smith in order to bring a harmonic between right and left. And then you have the great work of Henry George's Progress and Poverty, American political economists that many of us on this call deeply revere and have for decades worked with his ideas. Henry George says it's not enough that men should vote. It's not enough that they be theoretically equal before the law. They must have liberty to avail themselves of the opportunities and means of life. They must stand on equal terms with reference to the bounty of nature. And when there is correct thought, right action will follow. And his writings are so clear that you get the train of the correct thought so that it quite nicely leads to a clear solution. If you ask the right question, then the answer will appear. Now jumping around to Tsarist Russia, to the great Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy, who said solving the land question means the solving of all social questions. People do not argue with the teachings of Henry George, they simply do not know it. Tolstoy wrote many letters to Tsar Nicholas, urging him to implement the land policies and tax policies of this American Henry George. Well, again, didn't listen to Tolstoy's urgings, and we had revolutions in Russia, bloody revolutions, Bolshevik revolutions, Stalinists. We had millions killed, and we had then the Tsar and his family assassinated. So it's said that Leo Tolstoy had a large portrait of Henry George behind his desk. I couldn't find that, but I think I've seen it years ago. So there is Henry George Jr. after Henry George had passed, actually visiting Tolstoy at his home in Polyanov, I think that was his place, near Moscow. And this was probably a short time before Tolstoy fled from his home because of conflicts with his wife, and took a carriage to a train station, went a couple days by train, got pneumonia, and died in the trainmaster's house. So now, Sun Yat-sen, the first provisional president of Republic of China, the teaching of Henry George will be the basis of our program of reform. The land tax is the only means of supporting government, is an infinitely just, reasonable, and equitably distributed tax. And on it, we will found our new system. Now see how these perennial wisdom teachings, we traced it back to Mencius many hundreds of years ago. Confucius and then Mencius, he didn't find it through that. He found it through the teachings of Henry George. And that's a story in itself, but we can't tell all these stories here. So we can build a system of public finance that will strengthen and maximize incentives for fair distribution of wealth, environmental protection by including in pollution taxes, efficient wealth production, provision of adequate government service, and definitely peaceful resolution of territorial conflicts, land and resource wars by sharing the commons rent, i.e. socializing the rent, which is the unearned income, which is created by society as a whole. It's not earned by the private individual. So it's a social value. We want to, again, socialize the commons rent. These are commons rent domains. Surface land size based on land value, probably the very most valuable of the commons rent. The oil, even more so than the oil and the minerals. There's certainly water, farm, timber, grazing land, electromagnetic spectrum, which we give away rather than auction off to public benefit. And certainly these geo-orbital zones are up for outer space land grabs, while reducing or eliminating taxes on labor-created wealth. Income, especially from wealth, wages, payroll. Capital as tools in the machines, especially of sustainable quality. take the taxes off the sales, especially for basic necessities, and don't tax the building of and improving of our houses and other buildings. So socializing rent to fairly share the commons and the surplus of our collective efforts while untaxing the production of our individual mental and physical exertions can help us build a world that works for everyone. Now, this is great. Joseph Stiglitz is on this. I wish he would talk about it much, much more. But he even wrote a book early on in his life called the Henry George Theorem. So he gets it. He says, in their simplest form, rents are nothing more than redistributions from one part of society to the rent seekers. Much of the inequality in our economy has been the result of rent seeking, because to a significant degree, rent seeking redistributes money from those at the bottom to those at the top. Rent seeking distorts resource allocation and makes the economy weaker. It's a centripetal force. The rewards of rent seeking become so outsized that more and more energy is directed toward it at the expense of everything else. So as the land rent grows and earned income shrinks, the power elite play their funny money games. The idols we worship, back to the worship of the bull, the worship of what's that guy, the terrible idol, Canaan, and then the Wall Street bull. Interesting, it's a bull in both cases. There are two ways to conquer and enslave a nation. One is by the sword, in other words, territorial land grabbing, conquering, and the other is by debt, John Adams. So some people think all wars are banker wars, and others think, oh no, it's all about land and resource wars. Let's say all wars are land, resource, and bankers wars. The land and money problems are intertwined. Land and money issues are intertwined. Whoever controls the most valuable land sites and natural resources will eventually control the money supply. And whoever controls the money supply often eventually comes to control the land. So we want to treat money as a social utility and land as a common heritage. Now, note, these are the two things in the perennial wisdom teachings, the Jubilee justice laws, that we have to make sure is the basic, fair, underlying structure of the economic system, is addressing the money and the land problem in a fair way. So today, debt is the new serfdom, the new slavery, usury on debts, taxes on land, usury on debts, high taxes. You get the picture here. We're living it. The next series of slides is from wonderful, now friend and colleague, Ellen Brown. Many of you know of her. Her important books, Web of Debt and the Public Bank Solution, launched the Public Banking Institute and a whole movement for public banks. We'll have a little bit more on this later. So she's written 12 books. And actually, she's written a number of books before she got into the money issues. She was writing about holistic health. The problem with running up the debt is the interest. Without interest, even a large federal debt might be sustainable. The debt growing there in the chart. Without interest, there might be no federal debt. Today, only the interest gets paid. We're not even paying off the debt, just interest that keeps increasing. So that's about as much of a usury system as you can imagine. So instead of jubilees, we have the business cycle, periodic financial collapse, widening the wealth gap. Now, those of us understanding the land problem see these two go together. We see the land rent increase along with the problem of the money system, and then we see the boom and the bust. So they're working together. We didn't start that way. The original money system of the American colonists used public money and credit. Precious metals were scarce. The colonies resisted taxation. Government issued bills of credit or scrip solved those problems, but sometimes created another, which was inflation. Pennsylvania's sustainable solution, according to Ellen in her research, bills of credit issued by a land bank were lent to the farmers. The results, there wasn't need for taxation then, there was no inflation and no government debt. The first US reset or bailout of state and federal debt was Hamilton's first US bank, issued the first US currency, backed by state debt sold as bonds. So Jackson shut Hamilton's US bank down. Lincoln then avoided a crippling Civil War debt by returning to the American system. Government issued greenbacks. But Lincoln was assassinated, some think majorly because of this money issue. The greenbacks were discontinued, silver was demonetized, a deep depression resulted. Meanwhile, in Europe, goldsmiths turned bankers, established fractional reserve banking with private banknotes. In England, fractional reserve banking was institutionalized when the privately owned Bank of England was founded in 1694. The colonists issued paper scrip until the Bank of England leaned on King George to forbid it. The result was depression and the American Revolution. There's also a very excellent book that shows the impetus for the revolution had also to do with the claiming of territory by the colonies, the major wealthy people of the eastern colonies that were grabbing land beyond the Appalachian Mountains. And Britain put an end to that with his line of demarcation. So again, really, if you look into it, the American Revolution had a lot to do with the land and money problems. Okay, the Federal Reserve, passed in 1913 under Woodrow Wilson, was modeled after the Bank of England. Remember, he said he made a terrible mistake in letting this pass. He really regretted it later on. The central bank issued money and lent it to the government, originally at interest. So the 16th Amendment, at the same time, we have the authorization of an income tax to pay the interest due to the Fed, which is a private bankster institution, for creating the money lent to the banks that were lent to the government. So according to Georgetown professor Carol Quigley in Tragedy and Hope, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. Now notice financial capitalism. There's an acronym, FIRE sector. FIRE is finance, insurance, and real estate. So when you get down to those underlying structures, there's no need to get caught up in left versus right. We can look at the very fundamentals of economic justice through this approach and understanding. So the apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world central banks, which were themselves private corporations. Each central bank sought to dominate its government by its ability to control treasury loans. But banks to create money, in fact, most of it, banks do not act simply as intermediaries, lending out deposits that savers place with them. Commercial banks create money in the form of bank deposits by making new loans. So bank deposits make up about 97% of the amount of money currently in circulation. Actually, what money creation in the modern economy. So you only have to keep 10% or less of your bank deposits, and then you can loan out 90% at interest. What's wrong with this system? Private bankers are in control. We're completely dependent on the commercial banks. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation, cash or credit. If the banks create ample synthetic money, we are prosperous. If not, we starve. So the mathematical problem, banks create only the principal, not the interest. Where do you have to keep getting these interest payments? You have to keep bleeding someone, taking more from labor and production. So as a result, debt at interest always grows faster than the real economy. Now, in the land analysis, we know that the land rent grows faster than the real economy. Again, the interplay of the land and money problem. Okay, somebody's coming in. Welcome, John. The gap is filled with more debt. So we know pyramids. That's how we get what is it, 0.001% of the population of the planet owning more wealth than half the people on Earth. Okay, so the whole economy, when you have the land and money problem and taxes functioning like it does, is one giant pyramid scheme. Now my slideshow's a little stuck. So we're looking at these problems of the money system the way it is. Again, these are Ellen Brown's slides this series. So credit booms lead to bust. Land price inflation leads to busts. Busts could be avoided with debt jubilees as described in Leviticus and practiced in ancient Mesopotamia. Economist Michael Hudson has done a lot of work on the ancient debt cancellations, but they can't be done today because the lenders are not the government. So the first great resets were the Sumerian kings avoided debt overload with the periodic debt jubilees. Just cancel the debt. A new king comes in, he wants to set it up so everybody will like him. So he cancels all the debt. It kind of starts out with a clean slate. So the system worked until money, privatized, and land control. But the king even did, you could have a good be the lender and cancels the debt. Finance is expensive. There's a high cost of private finance, more is spent on Wall Street fees than on roads in Los Angeles. Los Angeles school districts are paying over 3 times the principal on capital appreciation bonds. Debt-strapped governments wind up selling off public assets, which means higher user fees and tolls. Okay, so you get that. We're loaning, the public sector is making getting money loans from private banks, and then we, the taxpayer, are paying even more to finance the government because we're financing these interest in usurious banking system. So there's plenty of room for increasing the money supply for public purposes, for infrastructure, saving the environment, for national dividends, stimulus checks, for Medicare for all, for student debt release. We do need a currency reset, which historically has happened after a debt crisis. Up and down, you're seeing that chart. So how state and city officials can save Main Street, establish public banks by emergency executive order in response to the pandemic and shutdown. According to banking experts, the basic mechanisms for a public bank could be set up in a couple of months. The bank can then borrow from the Fed at these very low interest rates, provide 10 times the bank's capital and credit at below market rates to distressed communities, and work with community banks to fund loans for small and medium-sized businesses. Public banking is now a vibrant movement. This is US legislative progress. Look at all these states. I think they had at least 18 bills I read recently introduced this year. So what I want is the land tax movement and the public bank movements to start acknowledging and seeing how they're both very important pieces of this puzzle and start to work together at least on a kind of parallel track, because there's a lot to do here. So this is your link to publicbankinginstitute.org, webofdebt.com, ellenbrown.com. You can get her 2 major books. Ellen visited with me for a week in September, and so I heard about Derek Green. He was a city council member running for mayor currently, that he understood he was for both land value tax and he was working for a public bank for Philadelphia. I said, this guy is a rare jewel, Ellen, we got to go see him. So we drove into Philadelphia, met with him. He was actually in the middle of a conference, but was happy to meet with us, had a good chat. So this is a very rare jewel of a guy. We just think he's great. We need more public officials or people running as candidates to run on the public bank and the land value tax. Okay, we're going towards the end of this now. A few more slides left. So we all know the military industrial complex, military financial intelligence, oil, big pharma complex. I mean, it's everything's pretty much in the control of that 0.001% when you get that back down to it. BlackRock and State Street and so on. The many-headed hydra, you might say. So people are trying to chop off individual heads, but then 2 more heads sprout out. What we need, and I think this analysis I'm giving you gives us, is how to get to the root that's creating all this monopoly game. And we're saying this is rooted in the land and money problems. So here's one of our favorites, right? You want to talk about a Wachiko wizard? Henry Kissinger, to population should be the highest priority for policy towards the third world, because the US economy require large and increasing amounts of minerals from abroad, especially from less developed countries. Yeah, so we have to ask who's controlling those minerals and the land. So here we got the fat cat, here we got the game board, here we got all the little people. We are the many, they are the few. Why are they still having all this power? Because they're so clever and so good at keeping us all divided. They're so good at keeping us looking at different pieces on the game board than the ones that are really important. But that's what we can wake up to. We can really, when we get beyond, we become post-partisan, beyond all these things they're trying to divide us over, and say, we are human beings. We have equal rights to the earth as a birthright. We need to share and have a fair a fair money system. So this looks pretty bad, but it looks like they're playing on the Monopoly game board. The Monopoly game was actually invented as a folk game by a Quaker woman who was a Georgist. There's a whole book about how the Monopoly game was to be played. The first round was how it creates Monopoly. That's how it's played now under the patent that was stolen. And the second way the game was to be played was under the land value tax, the Henry George prescriptive rules. And when you play it that way, the wealth just keeps circulating. There's no big winners, losers. It's just an endless game of exchange and flow. So if you look at all the games, whether it's Go in China, the Asian game of Go, or chess, which chess came from India, they're all played on these grids. So the grid represents the game board itself represents the land. And so the game is black, white, there's adversary, there's winners and losers, right? And the ones who like play this game, they're very clever at manipulating these pawns, which are most of us, and the pieces on the game board to their benefit. But when you really address the money and then the land problem, they can't play this game anymore. So housing is such a problem in this country. People are enslaving themselves to mortgages to buy a house. It used to be one person, just one person working full time could buy a nice house. We know those days are over. It's mom and dad, everybody's got to work to pay that mortgage. So it's been a gradual enslavement. It's very serious right now as we see the gross increase in the homeless population. It's not the house, but the land values that keep rising in proportion to the other factors of protection, like wage, labor. So a few real quick examples of commons rents funds. Alaska Permanent Fund, established when the Alaska state saw there was going to be a lot of money coming in because of all the oil being discovered. So they set up, by the way, the Alaska Constitution is based on a commons, that the resources of Alaska are commons that belong to the people of Alaska. So they charge significant resource rent fees to their access to oil. And then they distribute an annual, they have for over 30, maybe 40 years, a dividend check. Everybody who's resident in Alaska for 1 year gets a cash payment. It was highest than ever this year. It was $3,000, over $3,000. That's significant income, a family of 4. And they teach the children, this is yours by right of ownership of the resources of Alaska. There's 2 books edited by Carl Wiederquist, Michael Howard. I have an article in the second one, which is exporting the Alaska model. I have a critique of the fund. I put out it's many positives, but there is some criticism that I have about it. I don't have time to go into it now. Okay, so the website for the Alaska Permanent Fund and the dividend website, very transparent, very easy to use. They really keep everybody abreast of what's going on. So this is a kind of sovereign wealth fund that we need with this high degree of transparency and citizen support. Another example of commons rent working early on in California, the irrigation districts under the Wright Act. After one California rancher, Henry Miller, which I just found out he's like a great, great, great uncle of Tucker Carlson. I love to talk to Tucker about this sometime. He owned over 1 million acres of land, and then he won full rights to the water of the Kern River. So the citizens organized. What happened actually was there was a teacher who understood Henry George's economics, and he got himself elected to the state legislature, and he led this movement. And his last name was Wright. So the Wright Act was legislated, permitting local irrigation districts to build dams and canals and other infrastructure to be funded by bonds paid off by the land rent. So in 10 years, this area, the Central Valley, was transformed into over 7,000 independent farms. The Wright Act was amended to mandate the total exemption of all improvements from the tax base. Irrigations included in tax land as they went along through a few years. That was not only used for farming, but also as the communities grew for residents and commerce within townships. Steadily, the irrigation districts evolved to provide reclamation, recreation, and electric power. So the formerly semi-arid plains of the San Joaquin Valley, owned by this million-acre guy, became the breadbasket of America, one of the most protective areas of the planet. What happened? What happened was The first lien on the land went to the local government, the local irrigation district. The Bank of America did not like this. It took the case two, I think maybe three times, to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided to side with the banks, and it completely undercut this approach, so that now taxpayers throughout the United States subsidize corporate irrigation in these large corporate agriculture areas. So again, I mean, it's the banks that undermined it. Again, the need to have both the public bank and the land value tax. When you have the land value, stash the tax dollars into the public bank until it's ready to be utilized for public purposes. Others will deposit in the public bank so that they can then get low interest, no interest loans. So state of Pennsylvania, 20 cities, Pennsylvania have been gradually shifting their taxes off homes and other buildings and onto land rent. Although citizens still must pay state and federal income taxes, the split rate or two-tier approach has proven benefits. This was the Mayor Reed that brought this in. He was mayor for about 20 years. He says the city of Harrisburg continues in the view that a land value taxation system, which places a much higher tax rate on land and on improvements, is an important incentive for the highest and best use of land in already developed communities such as cities. Now, mind you, before this began, Harrisburg was the second most distressed city in the United States. Only East St. Louis was worse by federal distressed city criteria. And within a few years, 4,000 boarded up buildings, originally 400 down to 400, decrease in crime, decrease in arson, a lot of benefits, money for new parks, and Harrisburg began winning Best Cities awards. It's truly a miraculous what a small application of this can do. I think I already just told you some of this. I already just told you this about how, yeah, okay. So Allentown is our third largest city in Pennsylvania where I live. In 1997, it started taxing buildings less than land after a popular vote. Now that popular vote, we got to talk about. People went around to houses, went around block by block, showed people how they would benefit under this approach of taxes. They voted to freeze all other taxes and only permit land value tax or land value tax increases. The few that own large amounts of land in Allentown launched a big campaign to have another vote. They had little airplanes flying with banners trying to get people to vote this out. They had a lot of media exposure, but the city had to vote it in for the second time, and then it took. So according to analysis by the Center for the Study of Economics, there's their website, Allentown's new construction and renovation thereupon grew by 32% in dollar value in the 3 years after the shift to land value taxation as compared to the prior 3 years. We see this consistently. It sounds like, what kind of indicator? Building values? Yeah, we want infill development. We want these slummy, poor, deteriorated areas to start improving. We don't want sprawl when we can use good city land that's now being used for speculation. So there you go. So it's about sharing the earth. It's about pre-distributive justice, not after the wealth is so unequal, trying to claw it back from the 1%. It's pre-distributive justice. The land, money, and tax systems are fairly established so that extreme wealth inequality is simply not possible. And this combines freedom and fairness and gets us out of the left-right box. From the International Declaration on Individual and Common Rights to Earth, the exercise of both common and individual rights and land is essential to a society based on justice. But the rights of individuals and natural resources are limited by the just rights of the community. Denying the existence of common rights and land creates a condition of society wherein the exercise of individual rights becomes impossible for the great mass of the people. Peace prevails when individual humans understand that each is a part of all. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Resources and next steps, free courses at the Henry George School of Social Science, on many online courses and seminars now. Please engage with the International Union for Land Value Taxation's implementation work at the IU.org. Sign up for the newsletter. My book is 30 of articles and essays of mine. You can get to the free PDF at the IU.org books. And there's the Public Banking Institute website. I have no idea how far I've gone beyond my 30 minutes. Liz will let me know, but thank you for your attention, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Well, I think that this was a very substantial step forward from our last event, Alanna. You really, I think, delivered, the total package. I think now I hope everyone, can begin to dig in. I did want to make sure, though, that we tied in that this whole project is really going to be moving, hopefully in the very near future, into a campaign that we really want to get out to people with all the information that Alanna just presented in whatever form, it can be transferred from, that we can get into distributing it. And this would be tied to our effort to try to focus on King Charles as the largest landowner, in the world. The Windsor family, of course, it's the whole family. And you can see now the power I'm dealing with, I think, with this presentation. So I will leave that for the moment. I'm sure others have things to say.
Wow, Alanna, that was very, very good. I really appreciate this. And I want to, Jeffrey Smith over here, we did a book of his called Counting Bounty, looking at the worth of the earth. And I want to, he was where I first heard about Henry George. One thing that always amazes me on this journey we have in life is that, they send us off to school and we think that they're teaching us stuff, and they do teach us some stuff, but they don't teach us everything and what we need to get by. And I would like to ask Jeffrey what he thought of Alanna's presentation and about his journey on Henry George and geonomics.
It was a great George's presentation, and deep and thorough, and covered the whole history. And it's been my worldview most of my adult life. But to be totally frank, I've moved on because I'm tired of losing. I've noticed Georges are comfortable with losing. So I have turned to the science of social change. And there is as much science to be found there as there is in geonomics. But the human brain is by nature an ideologue, and it's very rare, especially the older you get, to change your mind. So this great idea doesn't make progress, not to to landowners, land speculators. It's the middle class. They're all their equities in their home, and if they ever get a chance to hear of this idea, that's their instant reaction. And my best friend is a homeowner in Portland, where we had the city interested in this tax shift, and she would pay more. So why support it? But most people have never heard of it. And I think they never will, as long as it's couched as a tax. And that just comes from studying the science of social change. You have to put money in the pocket, not take it out. So that's me going astray.
So I'll just say a couple things because I think it's really important, as really frankly a rebuttal to Jeff's view, is that I talked about Allentown, where homeowners voted this in. The strategy has to be in the right step-by-step approach. The experts in our field know how to implement it. Our international movement is now funding small grants in several countries now for implementation. I will critique the movement that has not had a strong enough focus on implementation, but that's changing and we know how to do it. We know how to do it strategically and effectively. So if you want to talk strategy, that's very good. We need all the strategy we can get. If you want to talk languaging, in this presentation, I'm talking about commons rent. I think commons rent is a really good way to get a handle. It depends on who you talk to. If you talk to public officials dealing with taxation, they don't mind talking about land value taxation. But I'm grateful that with Liz and Paul, we have people new to this movement who now see the connections of peace, which is their strength and their passion, and really should be of all of ours, the connection of peace to economic justice and economic justice to solving the land problem. So thank you, Paul and Liz. I so much appreciate and validate all of your life work.
And so again, how do we implement this? What are the strategies that need to be done? Because like Jeff said, there's a lot of, resistance and misunderstanding of how this works. I mean, most people think land tax, well, isn't that property taxes? We already have that type of system, but it's so again, you guys did this in Pennsylvania basically through educating the voters, and then did it through
No, only Allentown is a great example of educating the voters, unfortunately. Should have been more so. Mostly it's been going to city council members and mayors, people who want to solve city problems. And they say, let's go with this because we really need some solutions. We really have problems in our town or city. So it's been educating those politicians, and it's been done effectively by crunching numbers. And you do it in such a way that the constituents that you want to have vote for you, which are homeowners, most of them do pay less. It depends on the state, the city, but we can always strategically implement to get the most people to vote for this. And then as it clearly starts working and the benefits are seen, then we move forward the next steps.
Okay, what works in the Rust Belt does not work outside of the Rust Belt. In cities and states that are growing, that are popular, that are in the news, that are destination states, destination cities, it doesn't work. And
Okay.
let's see, Georgians are just coming from a place of hope and
Okay.
politics.
Okay, I don't want to get into a debate. That's just
Not
you.
coming in from
It's
a
different
place of
than mine.
And I'd
It's
like
just
to,
you. It's different than mine. We
And I'd
could,
like to-
we could have a whole deep conversation on this if we
You
wanted
said
to. I
that,
just
now you
want to
said it
point
the
out.
third time. Let Bruce say something.
yes, I'm going to do a little professional moderating here. I want everyone to unmute and just, pay attention to overlapping so that all could now contribute in this roundtable portion of the roundtable. And Wendell Fitzgerald, I saw your hand. What is your comment or question, please?
Well, I was first approached by the folks who are now saying, gee, we need economic justice in order to have peace. And of course, and nobody's arguing with that. What we've never had is any discussion. What are you talking about, economic justice? Well, this could be the beginning of that for the whole, if you really want peace, let's talk about this. And so what I would say to the folks who are benefiting from peace is that, the main problem from the political right is you're taking our rights away. I say, if you want to, well, of course, taxing land value is the most sacred right of all time. Everybody's willing to give up their earned income from wages, but nobody has apparently been willing to look at giving up the right to pocket an unearned income. So what I say to people is that, well, you're just a communist. You're just one of these people who want to get something for nothing. I say, great. We don't have I don't personally have a problem with war. If you want to have a war, fine. But we want to ask you to pay for it out of your unearned income. Do not ask me to finance your war or even my war out of earned income. That doesn't work. That's why it continues. But if you had to pay for it completely and a whole bunch of other stuff like restoring the environment out of unearned income, because you can't have peace without it, without that kind of taxation, and nor can you remediate the environment without bringing a lot of resources that, the simple answer is, well, you can have the war and destroy the environment. The cost will be that you have to give us economic justice. And
Wendell?
This is all of that. So enough said.
No, thank you. Jeff, before other folks, I'm intrigued by the, the science of social change. Do you have a resource you could share with everyone to dig further into that?
Well, I do, but I noticed that political people never use what they learned. So I
All
really-
right. Well, if you'd like to share it, come back. I see Liz.
Yeah.
Yes, dear.
Just a quick statement. I'm making this absolutely to you, Jeff, and everyone, but I really want you to accept the idea that we need everybody on our team. And that means if you have some other angle that's very effective for other reasons, that fits perfectly into this idea. So I think that it is a matter of getting beyond. I think one of the things Alanna said that I think is so important, we need to go beyond the right-left dialectic. Okay, the good, evil, the right, left, the Republican, Democrat, whatever you want to call it. And that includes all of us agreeing. We know what the problem is, and we know there are different angles on the solution. So you're more than welcome to bring that in and have a discussion about that.
Sure.
And I've got to save time.
No, that's not true. I mean, I've been defunded for bringing this in. And
Well, I hear the
how many-
same
how
thing
many-
from the Georges too, actually. They have the same complaint that you do.
Liz, I want
No,
to,
not really.
I want to go, and Jeff, I want to go in alphabetical order. I see.
This is not a George's group, Jeffrey. This is a peace group that's been founded decades ago through a lot of good work by Paul and Liz and their associates.
Which group are you talking about?
Your group, the one
Yeah, us,
sponsoring
but we're-
this
yeah, our piece-
conversation.
our piece, yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
Trine Day is a publishing firm that was founded about 20 years ago. As
Right.
far as a group decades old dedicated to this roundtable has been in existence for a little over a year.
I think this is going back into Paul's and my background, going back to the anti-war movement in Vietnam.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah.
wish I knew you that long. I wish I did.
Well, I've
But-
only known her 6 months.
Right.
Oh, my
Well,
goodness.
the best
But
6 months of
all
my
I
life.
wanted to establish is you're more than welcome to bring your angle in.
That's
Amen.
not
And
true.
speaking of,
I got defunded for bringing my angle in.
No,
Well,
we
we're
won't
gonna-
defund you. We won't defund
We
you.
won't
We won't defund you.
I got
They will
arrested.
defund you. There's no funding available.
Alana, hold off. Alana, calm down. I got arrested in the Vietnam days too. So that is our group. But for every person who's ever heard of this very mild LVT, probably 1,000 who've heard of basic income. Why is that? I mean, a scientist would ask, how did that happen?
well, we're trying to change that with our efforts. Allow me to ask some other folks to share their questions. We'll start with Diane. How are you? What have you got to share or ask?
Yeah, hi. So thank you, Alanna. That was brilliant as always, and I probably could listen to it again. I just found actually we're in this new view group together, and I met Alanna after 9/11 at a conference she organized at the Peace College. And on Monday, our new group, we had Sam Husseini talking about Vote Pack. But what I wanted to really mention is I just recently learned that there's going to be a big rally, Rage Against the War Machine, in Washington on February 19th. And it's sponsored by the Libertarian Party and the People's Party. And there are other also groups that are sponsoring it. So they're kind of like maybe mutations from the Republican and Democrat, but we're working together and we're all aligned. So, and I think we need to reframe what we think of what a party means altogether.
And it's very valuable info to us because as we go forward trying to bring a proposal for world peace and economic justice, introducing ourselves to all groups who would be interested in pursuing peace is very valuable. Diane, do you have any other comment or question for us?
Well, just I think we need to get off the axis of right left and stop framing ourselves as right and left, because then you define yourself in opposition to the
Absolutely.
other. And there's also the parties now have mutual disparagement, like it's compulsory mutual disparagement
Yeah.
all the time.
Yep.
So we need to rise above that. And I think it's
Valuable
definitely
history.
what's happening. So thank you.
Amen. Ruth, your icon's up.
Hi, yes. First of all, thank you, Alanna. It was amazing to experience I feel like I need to go through it about not just another time, about 10 times. And I'm having trouble
Well,
trying to get my head really really understand it. I mean, I understand it, but I don't really understand it. And for example, one of the questions I have is looking at what's happening with Bill Gates' appropriation of almost 1 million acres for farmland. And I was thinking, how would this kind of thinking
Great question.
deal with that?
Do you
Because
want to take that on, Alanna?
Well, I looked at, the state legislature wanted to know how the land value tax would affect farmers in Pennsylvania. So in my book, there's a pretty substantive article about this tax policy and farmers. And it's actually kind of intuitive what you would think, but most small farmers have more in their buildings and their equipment, and they would be untaxed. And the corporate agriculture has just doesn't have all those farm buildings. So what it actually does, it drives the land reform. So two things with Bill Gates: he would be paying a hell of a lot more taxes on the land than all big landowners would. Of the land, and we would want to drive that towards land reform. But then I also think there's place for a direct land access movement where you just say, no, this is way more than a fair share for anybody to have. And if the tax isn't driving it quickly enough and fast enough, then I think this direct access where we the people vote to break up these large land holdings and enable small farms and enable ecological villages for homeless people to be established, for instance.
Ruth,
We have the power to do that. We would have the power to do that if we were post-partisan and joined together and address the land problem.
Ruth, between that and Alanna's book, I want to get to a couple other questions, get back to you if I can, just in the fairness of the next 12 minutes is our goal. Harinder, you did have your hand up. Please unmute and share what you have for us.
Yes, first of all, thanks for the great presentation. I think this is all the stuff about economics and society that has been kept hidden from the official theories of economics. And I wish I'd come in at the beginning because I want to go back and really understand it. But I think this is all the stuff that needs to be out there, but is not there and will be obstructed heavily by the powers that be, because the economic theory that they teach in universities is designed to create the system that we actually have, where a few people control everything.
Harinder, is that your whole comment? Do you have more?
I have a little more. That what somebody else was calling science of social change has been going on, in my view, for centuries, whether you call it serfdom and the fight for democracy, or the left versus right, or the 1% with the 99%. This has been going on for the longest time, kings versus the people, et cetera, et cetera. And this kind of information needs to be understood by people. And we are going to run into lots of obstructions in getting this information out, because there are powerful interests that don't want it out there. They certainly don't want their private banking system put back in the hands of. So I hope all this public banking stuff is going to achieve certain results.
Well, I claim 90% of the stubbornness represented by everybody here, Harinder, so you can count on me. And Chris, did you want to have a?
No, Peter.
Okay, Peter, I've memorized you as next in the list of questions. Hi.
Hey, thanks for having me on board, Bruce, even though I got here late. I had to unlock a car that had a dead battery, and that doesn't occur so infrequently in Minnesota. But
Peter, but listen to this. Almost instantly, this playback will be on Chris Milligan's Facebook profile, and he's on Facebook as the initials RA, Chris with a K, Milligan. So almost instantly after we're done, you could watch it from the top. That goes for anybody. And then in about 10 days, I'll disseminate it on social media and my Substack as a YouTube video. But please unpack your comment or question, please.
I agree that the issue of the land value tax requires some serious study, serious consideration, and communication. And we've talked about the land value tax at least since 1879, when Henry George wrote Progress and Poverty. And a good illustration of the value of the land value tax is Michael Hudson's illustration of the the Second Avenue subway in New York just started service. The first time they've opened up a new subway line in 80 years. And who are paying the taxes to dig the holes and build the stations? It's coming out of income rather than the increased land value of all the realty along the Second Avenue line, which ought to fund that extension. And Henry George made the argument that with a land value tax based as locally as possible, that helped communities where they were, helped states, and also by the power of the purse would check imperial adventures by the national government. When it comes to two other issues that I think are worth a lot of study, when we're talking about land, give some serious research into the mortgage electronic registration system, or MERS, which turned all title deeds to realty all over the country into a gigantic casino, unlike the way that people treated land and the laws that governed land until about 20 years ago. And Ellen Brown, who wrote The Web of Debt and a Public Bank Solution, cites some cases in Kansas, for instance, and Massachusetts, where people defeated the foreclosure using the MERS documents by saying, show me the title. And the plaintiffs, usually the banks or their agents, couldn't show the title, they lost. In other places, I'm sad to say that show me the title argument didn't work, like in Minnesota and federal courts that include Minnesota. And big lenders are hostile to any challenge to MERS. You can see that, okay? And it happens that the biggest bank in Minnesota is Wells Fargo, although I've got some nicknames for that, but for another time. And the last thing that I see, one of my other issues is
In about 20 seconds, please, Peter.
proportional representation. And Fair Vote has done a lot of studies. New York was best governed when it actually had proportional representation, and that's worth looking at another time. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Peter. Alanna, do you want to talk back to what Peter shared?
Well, he shared a lot, Peter, but I'd love to connect you with some of our colleagues in Minnesota.
Please
I
do.
think strong. Okay, I would love to, and any of you, whatever states you're in. I
Oh, we
would
have a
love
question.
to network
We-
with you.
We don't have to.
There's
quit at
strong
1:30.
towns. I don't know strong
Okay,
towns.
good.
I think it's in Minnesota, but they're working for land value tax too. Strong.
We have a
towns.
question in the chat by Edward, but you're here. Edward, do you want to come live, or do you want me to read your question or your point here?
Well, I just wanted to make the information available, not to get, there's not much time, but
Well, we
I'm a
just got our bookend just got moved back. We can relax and do what we want.
well, then I'll just say this. I've been trying to find a way to teach what Alanna is talking about, and even what Jeff is talking about, to adults, and get them to understand this idea of the planet being our commons, and that sharing the planet is what justice requires. And people do listen. I teach in senior adult education, and what I've tried to do is find a way to tell stories. People respond to stories, it seems, much better than analysis. So the latest series of stories I've been telling, and I put it in the chat, is on the life of Daniel Boone. This is a critical period in American history, and understanding what impact people like Daniel Boone had, and you can include Davy Crockett and all these frontier heroes, what the consequences of their actions on this settlement of this hemisphere. It just had tremendous consequences, and they were all land speculators. They all sought their fortune in acquiring land cheap or free, and waiting for others to come along and sell it to them as a profit, at a profit.
Mhm.
And that's a story that, someone mentioned that we don't learn much in school. with regard to history, and I think that that's an unfortunate truth. So that's my little part of trying to reach a broader audience. You have 50 people in a classroom, that's great, but putting these lectures, I record all of my lectures, I put them up on my YouTube channel, and while it's no great accomplishment, about 550 people subscribe to my YouTube channel.
Well, let me share those details in the chat, the comment you said, and so people can search YouTube, Edward Dodson, Dodson. That's for who's listening on Facebook, and the YouTube playback, in case your name isn't on the screen. Sometimes I don't see every name on our capture on the YouTube playback. All your lectures you've given on courses are recorded and available online.
Yeah, there's some other material, not to hog the time, but Jeff Smith and I collaborated. Jeff is the author of a play about Thomas Paine, and in an early version of his play, he asked me if I would create a video, a PowerPoint-based video on it, and we worked on that. And it's up there. And Jeff has taken that project to another whole level that maybe he wants to talk about for a minute.
Well,
Well, I
yeah,
want to, can I say,
go ahead.
I just want to acknowledge Edward Dodson. He's too modest. He's a member of our Baltimore Land Value Tax Implementation Team. He's very present with our International Union for Land Value Taxation. He is really a servant of the people in terms of a life devotion of getting this economics out there. Thanks, Ed, buddy.
Yeah.
Okay. 3 quick points. Bruce,
Yo,
because you're likely to put to good use the information discovered by scientists about social change, I will send you a brief bibliography. It won't take you too much time to look through it or read it all, for that matter. Fascinating stuff. The second thing is that just because I've moved on to science of change doesn't mean I've left the science of economics in Portland, which is a horrendous homeless problem. Me and a few others are trying to get a land tax into place that'll dampen down prices and drastically change the context for homelessness if land prices come down. And if you're into politics, Mike O'Mara, myself, and a few other libertarians in Maryland created a caucus in the Democratic Party, Democratic Freedom Caucus, which is Georgia's peas, everything you like. So if you want to be active politically, join that caucus. You can find them in Facebook and other places. And the fourth thing is the play. Yeah, some professionals are putting it on in Portland, Oregon. And the premiere's in about 4 weeks. And if you would like to support that, because these aren't low-cost productions, feel free to either attend, or we're doing a crowdfunding, and you can find it on Kickstarter or GoFundMe. And it's called Tom Paine's Bones, because his bones got lost, just like his ideals did. And that's it, those 4 things. Is there any place, Bruce, to post any like that bibliography?
In the chat.
or you could email it to me, and I'll also, yeah, and also email it to me, and I can, I can do things with it, or put it in the chat.
I'll send you both that bibliography and the notice of the play.
Please do.
Alanna, could I say something?
Yeah, please do.
Yes.
Marty, I want to thank Liz and Paul for bringing Alanna on. That was just amazing. I want to study it further. Recently, I have professors that have been in Pennsylvania, but are also over at the Navy Postgraduate School and the DLI that will be very interested in it. And it's very exciting. I was happy to see Ruth here. So she's one of
Thank you, Marty.
Yeah,
You
but
know-
I just wanted to say one last thing. The people that will be very interested in Atlanta, I have been contacting the professors from Middlebury Institute I have a business plan about making peace profitable. And so we're sort of working on that. And the interesting part that you said today to me was you were talking about Big Bear. And I know Big Bear in California. He must be the great grandson, but he's doing some land retribution and being very successful in California. So it must be Big Bear's grandson.
Thank you,
It's
Marty.
another Big Bear. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone could unmute. Try to get in this conversation if you can. I see 3 hand icons, Diane, Ruth, and Edward. I don't know if those were the old or
Carol.
new.
Carol,
Carol's
Carol.
fourth.
Oh,
Carol.
also, okay.
Carol.
Well, we haven't heard from Carol at all. So
Yeah.
everyone else, hold your horses. Carol, how are you?
I'm fine. It's great to see Jeff again. I haven't seen him in a while, and Wendell, and I so appreciate all the work that Liz and Paul and Alanna have done. I've been working on the money issue forever, and so it dovetails perfectly in with the land issue. I think we're at an extraordinary time right now too, where there's an incredible power grab going on, which most people have no awareness of, where the World Health Organization is trying to just take over control over everything in a massive way. And the solution seems to be from the grassroots up, but also with heart, with soul, with spirit. And there's so many local groups all over the world that are right now looking for change. And this is just such an important piece of the puzzle. I think once we get it out there, it'll just spread like wildfire. And so I'm glad to be part of this conversation. I thank you all for being here and your work.
Yes, Liz.
Yeah, I wanted to make a quick statement. I mentioned it earlier. That is the reason why we're determined to turn this into a huge marketing campaign. And the reason we're focusing on King Charles is because we consider him to be like, the poster boy for the problem. And the idea is that we really want to, sort of chase him down, so to speak. So we want you all to put your thinking caps on. This is more of a PR marketing problem. We've got to figure out how to break through the things that Jeff was complaining about and the things that Alanna was talking about the difficulty, and Wendell, the difficulty that this kind of economic solution has. And I am personally convinced that the reason it has such a big problem is because it is so easy to understand, and it is a very practical solution for most people. And when it's presented properly, and I happen to think Alanna is the best presenter because she's certainly the one that did it for me. When it's presented properly, it really is common sense that this will work.
And everyone listening, everyone listening to help, just think about sharing the link to this on Chris's Facebook profile, the YouTube video when you see it in the next 10 days. Follow me on Facebook to track it down if you don't know where to acquire it. Come and we do these roundtables once a month. Plug into our presences to find out how to see these once a month. Carol, you just praised the importance of local groups who are trying at the grassroots level to affect change. And I'm just wondering, do you have a resource or so that's online where folks around the country and around the world could quote unquote plug into such local groups? I'm just wondering.
I've struggled between working locally, regionally, statewide, internationally. So I have my own local groups that I meet with.
Gotcha. I just wondered. I didn't know.
But there is a group, the Helena Norbej Hodges Local Futures, and that's a place that people might be able to connect.
That's what I was looking for.
And-
Absolutely anything. Local futures. Okay.
And I think Alanna's work is really important because it's something that they have overlooked and
Indeed.
that has to be added to their agenda. They've
All
got
those
community currencies, but they don't have the land piece.
Thank you. All those resources at the end of Alanna's presentation. Ed, I think you were coming live with another question.
Yeah, well, some of us are old enough that we were active in the 60s. That's when I got my first feet in the wet sand of activism. But I've always been driven by our music of that period. And so in the last 5 or 6 years, I've taken to making some music videos out of some of the songs that have, I think, a strong social contact. They're all on my YouTube channel, but for example, Woody
Awesome.
Guthrie's song, "This Land Is Our Land."
Think about it, right?
Hardly anyone knows the full song, and so they don't know it was a protest song. And there are a number of others. Carol mentioned the word money. Well, I've done a version of Pink Floyd's song "Money."
Ed, we're gonna check it all out quickly. Chris,
But the most important one is a song by World Party. This is a band from the 90s. And the title of that song is It Like Today? And if you're going to see any of them, you must see that music video.
thank you, Edward. Chris,
Well, I think this is the most important, the economic part of it is because that's how they get us by our petards or whatever you call that. Because, I've been looking at this for an awful long time and looking at the secret societies out in the shadows and how they set things up to run the world. And I've talked about it before. And the top part is money, mining, and metal. Because if they control the mining, where the metal comes from, that the money's supposed to be based on, they're in a good position. Okay. And so, and the next parts are drugs, guns, and oil, and then media, movie/music, and quote unquote magic, their ability to hoodwink us and their preponderance in using mass trauma to keep us all in line. But I truly think with the internet, with the personal computer, we can continue to educate people. I mean, see, Jeffries had a hard time because he was way down the road on this geonomics, a lot of times almost by himself, and he was taking a lot of the slings and arrows from that. And so, it is there is a learning curve, here that people need to understand, but change is possible. And people are the driver of change. And we're lucky here in Oregon, we have the ability to, raise up an amendment and then vote on it in public. And so each of us, we need to continue our education, continue to work locally, and then tell our friends, we got to, not just sit and hope for change. We've got to make change. And that happens by actions. And now I'd like to understand this better because, now there's this talk about post office banks. And then you have credit unions, which are different than banks, but allow people to pool things together. And so I just say, onwards, we got to just continue this because we've got to take care of that top part, or we're just, treading water.
That is the reason we are choosing to try to bring all the attention on King Charles as the embodiment of the problem.
I love the way you think.
Huh?
I love the way you think.
Yeah, because he is the largest landowner in the world.
and Liz, I'm going to give you the last word.
Give Paul. I haven't heard from Paul.
Well, yeah, what I was going to say was Paul and Ruth. I'm going to ask. Ruth has been patiently waiting with a hand up, and then Paul, and then Liz. Ruth, please.
Okay, this has to do with the poverty of what's happening in America. I feel like the imbalance of wealth that has gone on has bought off both political parties. They are warmongers. They are the healthcare system has been bought off. There's nothing there. And what I'm hearing here, and I want to say this can become a political party.
Well, let's make it effective and let people make of it what they want.
There's something about this that can become a political party. And we need a political party because even the Green Revolution and the Greens, and this has been bought off too. So we need some kind of political
Organizing principle.
organizing principle. And this, it's here. It's really here. That's all I want to say.
I need to thank you, Ruth, for being here every month. And Paul, I'm gonna ask Diane threw a hand up. Then I swear it's Paul. Then I swear it's Liz. Diane.
Okay, thanks. I just feel uncomfortable as treating King Charles as the bad guy or the enemy or approaching him that way. And we've
No,
talked
we're-
about it in our
no.
group with Alanna. And I just put it in the chat because I didn't know you were going to call me. Maybe Alanna could say something about this, but you know, he has maybe just appealing to him in a positive way and also
Oh,
understand.
no, let me make a quick statement. We already know exactly what you're thinking. You're totally right. We are not going to approach him in an offensive way at
Okay.
all, at all. The purpose of this is education, but we feel that by drawing the attention to King Charles and what he represents is a way to talk about it that helps personalize it. We're not talking about the billionaires out there. We're talking about an individual. And he happens to be coming up to his coronation on May 6th. So we have a lot of attention on him. And we
Okay.
feel we can draw on that attention to point
Okay.
out these facts. And right now, I think the British people could really use these facts. And there are plenty of Georgists, I think, in Britain that may enjoy this possibility too.
Is there some positive action or way that he could reframe his power and position?
It's-
Yeah.
I would suggest that we would make the suggestion of how he could become a genuine leader for the world if he could embrace these ideas. But that's up to him. Obviously, we certainly have no way of guaranteeing that he will actually embrace them. But that's how we would want to approach him.
And we're going to, and develop that month by month, Diane,
Yeah, we're
and
doing
you are
that, yeah.
cordially.
The men in gray.
Invited.
Also, real fast, people should watch The Crown and like look at his childhood and how he was like forced to go to military school and stuff like that. Like when you just think about him and his life. So
Thank you. All right.
I think
Please, Harinda.
Quick points. Prince Charles is the biggest promoter of the climate change thing, whether one believes it or not, whether one thinks it's a hoax. Just keep that in mind.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
In addition to the military industrial complex and the financial oil intelligence complex that you mentioned, right now, I believe the biggest complex is the pharmaceutical industrial complex, which was behind all these vaccine mandates.
Mhm.
Third, this idea of the commons being public property has been quashed very harshly with the label communism put on it, which is why the idea communism is so hated or reviled in America. So these are some of the mechanisms they have used.
Yeah.
And as for
Comprehensive.
protests, very quickly, I just one or two more points. In Europe, thousands of, in fact, in France, there was a protest of 1 million voters against the pension change thing. The politicians planted by the WEF have been just dismissing the protests, saying, we don't care how many people are protesting. We will continue to supply weapons for the purposes that I don't have time to explain. And they've been fixing elections with things like gerrymandering and so on.
Thank
And
you, Harinda.
that's it.
I appreciate it. Just
So
time
those,
for-
I just meant to say that those are the obstacles that need to be
Absolutely.
taken into account. That's all.
Thank you, my friend. And I've got Paul, we've got such vital info in the chat. I'm gonna walk people through some technology here. You're gonna thank me for you Zoom participants. At the bottom of the chat column, if you've got the chat open, if you've never done this before, it was brand new to me. At the very bottom, there are some tiny little gray icons and 3 dots. Click the 3 dots. It says save chat. Click that. And it
Copy.
puts a file of all this content in the chat in a folder that you'll find in your folder searching Windows Explorer, Mac, whatever you call it. So now you've got Jeff Smith's contact information, the resources he alluded to before, Edward's reference to his YouTube channel. It's my new favorite toy.
Mm.
My birthday's in December if you want to thank me. Mr. Paul Fitzgerald.
I just want to thank everybody for coming out today. This has been very exciting. There's just a lot of, this feels right. The movement is right. And I understand Jeff's concern about, the frustration with failure. Everything we stood for, everything we want to have happen to our country, to our people, and to the world, it needs to be done. And this is a very workable vehicle with which to do it. And I think we have to have confidence that we can move that forward and overcome whatever minor obstacles are there in order to make that happen. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Bruce and Alanna, for your presentation, and everybody else for being here. Thank you.
Onward.